You guys want to see how I built this post and beam building for about $1,000 without any help or heavy equipment? Let's check it out.
Flashback.
So if you haven't seen my previous videos on this project, make sure you check some of those out. Those involve the foundation that I did myself and the first wall. And in the first wall video, I go more in depth on the actual notching process and how I actually form these walls and put them together and how I lift the first wall.
16 paranoia-filled days later.
So after building the first wall, I decided to finish the rest of the kit all at once. So that involves really just cutting a lot of very precise square ends and then notching a few of those square ends to intersect with the other beams. Then I drilled the beams as I did in the previous video and attached them the same way. Here I am doing the notch for the crossbeam. Here you can actually see I had to build an artificial wall. The first wall we raised was able to tip against the house, but I was worried about the second wall tipping too far, so I actually had to make an artificial wall for the second wall to fall against once it got raised up. And then even though it was rainy, we kept the tarp up and managed to push through and get the second wall raised up. I think it was actually even snowing a little bit that day. You can see here, once we got it raised up past 45, it started to become really easy, and my wife actually finished pulling the wall up into place with a rope. And after we got the timbers into place, I decided to plasma cut some big ornate washers that not only worked as washers, but also attached the beam to the cross beam too, for extra security. Now I know what you're thinking, how am I going to get these beams straight up in the air 12 feet? I'm going to do what the ancient Romans and the Ephesians did back in the day, which is use a teeter-totter system to raise it, so you're not actually raising this beam by itself. The most you're ever doing is raising one end of the beam. So I'd raise one end 8 inches, put a piece of wood under it, exchange that piece of wood for a cinder block, go over to the other side, raise it 6 inches, 8 inches, put a piece of wood under it, put a cinder block under it. On either side of the cinder block towers, you can actually see boards I've put that prevent the beam falling away from the structure at all. So this is safe this way. And you can actually see I wrap the cinder block tower in boards and screw those boards into wooden blocks every so often, securing the stack of cinder blocks too. So nothing's free floating here. Which is good because the biggest issue I had was the wind and rain that kept coming. We even got a storm one day that was so bad my tarp garages blew away. Luckily none of the cars were hurt. But it really tore all the tarps off. And I mean, at one point I was watching the structure start to shake, and I just kind of had to walk away and figure I'd pick everything up in the morning. But luckily the way I secured everything, nothing moved at all. The tarps took a beating, but that was about it. About half of the day later, the flooring had dried out and everything was fine. So we proceeded forward, raised it up the last couple of feet so we could get the beam up in place and up onto the top cross beam. And then what I decided I'd do is slide the top cross beam across instead of trying to do this on one end and then do it on the other end. And the added benefit to sliding this beam across was when we get to the other side, the tall side of the frame, we actually have we're locked in. We're sitting on the cross beam and we've got the rest of the 2 feet of the tall beam to go, and we're leaned against it, so we're really secure. And this was actually pretty easy because these notches were sealed with wax, so I could actually slide this beam across without too much effort. I could actually really kind of do it with one hand. So I just had to make sure I didn't push the cross beam too far, so I didn't push the cross beam out of the notch and down on top of me. With the far beam in place, I decided I'd go a little bit quicker this time and use the air jack to get it up the first 6 feet. And then once we got up to 6 feet, we went ahead and went back to the lifting it just 8 inches at a time. The toughest part of this was transferring from the tower to the post and beam. If the two weren't completely level, there was a little bit of teeter-tottering, and you don't want that with that much weight up that high. And then you can see up here, I'm above 10 feet, and I'm using the same method, but sitting on top of the crossbeam to raise that top crossbeam the last 2 feet into place. And and then I had to do a couple of little modifications on the holes for the bolts and bolted into place. And then we're all done. It's time to move on to the roof. The roof is pretty simple. I just made a single pattern that fit with the roof, and then came down and copied it on all my roof joists. And then the nice thing about these is that they actually fell down perfectly straight and notched and locked right in.
Alright, well I hope that video was helpful to you guys. If it was, make sure to give me a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're not already. Check out some of these other videos on the project, and we'll catch you guys next time.
'Cause I've been living life right like I could just die.